Euranet Plus Panorama is a weekly review of European news broadcast by our network of EU radio stations.
Hi there, I'm Jo and you're listening to Euranet Plus Panorama. Assessments are pouring in on Slovakia's recent presidential election, one that saw a pro-European candidate lose out to an ally of controversial PM Robert Fico, who now has a free hand to roll out his illiberal agenda. In other news, Brussels finally reaches agreement on the long-awaited Migration and Asylum Pact. On Saturday, the 6th of April, Slovakia held a runoff between the two presidential hopefuls who had won the most votes in the previous round on the 23rd of March, namely pro-European diplomat Ivan Korčok and Peter Pellegrini, a candidate suspected of having pro-Russian sympathies. The latter triumphed. President-elect Pellegrini served as Prime Minister of Slovakia between 2018 and 2020 and subsequently co-founded a left-wing nationalist anti-migration party that forms part of current PM Robert Fico's ruling coalition. Although presidential powers are limited in Slovakia, the president ratifies international treaties, appoints leading judges, serves as commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and has the power to veto laws passed by parliament. The outgoing pro-European president, Zuzana Čaputová, has been using this power to put the brakes on Robert Fico's proposed reforms of the country's media and justice system, which have been widely criticised for threatening the rule of law. The justice reform is seen by a large section of the Slovak judiciary as a purge. It also aims to abolish the Office of Special Prosecutor, which was responsible for investigating corruption cases, including the alleged corruption of the Prime Minister himself. On Thursday, MEPs in plenary quizzed Justice Commissioner Didier Reynders on how the Commission intends to address these controversial proposals by Fico's government.
With regard to the amendments to the Criminal Code and the dissolution of the Special Prosecutor's Office, I would stress once again that the Commission has already made representations to the Slovak authorities and will closely monitor future developments. The Commission will not hesitate to take all necessary measures to preserve the rule of law and protect the financial interests of the European Union. As stated during the debate, respect for the rule of law is the best way to ensure EU budget support for the benefit of Slovak citizens.
With EU support, President Čaputová succeeded in obtaining a relaxation of this reform in March. But Pellegrini's inauguration will likely give Fico free rein. The founder of Lithuania's Siena Centre for Investigative Journalism, Šarūnas Černiauskas, who is in close contact with journalists in Slovakia, believes that this election outcome is good news for Russia, bad news for the EU, and a wake-up call for Lithuania, which will hold its own presidential election next month. Žinių Radijas reports.
Well, there must have been cries of joy in Moscow when the results of the second round were announced. After the first round, it looked like maybe the people of Slovakia had woken up, because they surely must have been sleeping when they voted once again for Fico, who they lifted out of the Prime Minister's office with their own hands. But the second round showed that those sympathies are alive and well. Yes, this is really good news for Russia, really bad news for the EU, and at the same time a very serious alarm signal for all of us. Because these movements, look at the rhetoric of certain politicians in Lithuania, are a copy-paste of the same thing, we will bring peace, we will be friends with everyone. More than one presidential candidate is saying this. In fact, this is a very serious wake-up call, and voters should listen very carefully to what the candidates are saying about relations with Russia and Belarus. If a candidate claims they will be friends with everyone, no, they will not. That candidate will only have one friend. That is what you need to be aware of when you make your decision at the ballot box.
Several of Lithuania's 5 presidential candidates have something of an ambiguous stance on Russia, including one who has a reasonable chance of reaching the second round. Hence, this is a very real conversation taking place in Vilnius right now. Elise Bernard is a specialist in post-communist states at pro-European research centre, the Robert Schuman Foundation. RTBF asks her if Bratislava is seeking to emulate Budapest.
Slovakia is looking for its own dynamic, I think, vis-à-vis Russia. It is to some extent trying to emulate the Hungarian model, to gain some leverage on the international stage. Slovakia did not congratulate Vladimir Putin on his re-election, but its own presidential election campaign was marked by statements such as, "This war in Ukraine is not our war. We have no business supporting it. The people of Slovakia are suffering." Okay, it's not Viktor Orbán, but we can perhaps see signs of a rapprochement in the country's bilateral relationship with Russia.
Perhaps it is unsurprising that Slovakians, who have found themselves on the front line when it comes to receiving Ukrainian refugees, not to mention Ukrainian agricultural products that knock down prices, are turned off by further pledges of support for Ukraine. Pellegrini and his allies in government have certainly been able to use this to their advantage. And Merla Pajula, the Estonian ambassador to Austria, Slovakia and Switzerland, believes that Slovakian media output was significantly skewed to increase this advantage in the run-up to the elections, as she tells Kuku Radio.
See, mis seal tegelikult toimub, on mõneti hoomamatu. Mis torkab silma on see, et
what is really going on there is somewhat unfathomable. What is striking is that the government has failed to include people who think otherwise. For example, the fundamental decision not to speak to media outlets that were critical of the government, and the exclusion of non-profit organizations that have represented minority or opposition positions. Anyone who supports the opposition has had minimal opportunities to make their voice heard.
Inimene on olukorras, kus tema väljund on suhteliselt ahtaks jäänud.
Yet Łukasz Ogrodnik of the Polish Institute of International Affairs, who is no fan of Fico and the like, does acknowledge in an interview with Polski Radio that Pellegrini enjoyed significant public support even before this election campaign commenced.
Peter Pellegrini is someone who has been striving for years to build an image of a moderate centrist in his views as a social democrat, which has also won him public support. He is also a politician who has long led in opinion polls in the public trust category, even overtaking President Čaputova.
Let's move now from a vote in which high levels of migration may have played a part to a vote on Europe's overall migration policy. Yes, new rules on migration and asylum were narrowly endorsed by MEPs in Wednesday's mini-plenary in Brussels, bringing more than 3 years of wrangling to an end. The new pact centres on new border procedures, through which migrants arriving legally in EU member states will be placed in closed centres with extraterritorial status to undergo a selection process. Those who come from a country with a high recognition rate for international protection will be subject to traditional asylum procedures. Others will be subject to a new fast-track procedure with a view to repatriating failed applicants more quickly. A form of pan-EU solidarity has also been introduced. Specifically, non-frontline member states can choose between accepting relocated asylum seekers or contributing financially. Yet the absence of specific sanctions linked to this nominally mandatory requirement casts doubt on its value. These concerns, which primarily affect frontline countries such as Italy and Greece, did not stop Dimitris Kyrides, the Greek immigration and asylum minister, extolling the virtues of the new pact in an interview with Sky.
This is a great European success, and we welcome it. This pact brings more Europe to migration management, more money, more Frontex, and more solidarity. We were the ones who demanded it. We said that we needed this solidarity, and we achieved it yesterday with a lot of effort, thanks to the votes of certain political groups and in spite of opposition from some others.
Before the vote, MEPs reviewed the 10 legislative acts in a debate with the Council and the Commission. Some were cautiously optimistic, including Romanian EPP member Eugen Tomac.
I think the most important thing is that a consensus has been reached and that there is a new approach that requires a unified response. The problem of illegal immigration is not one that belongs purely to the states that are most exposed, the states at the borders of the European Union. It is a Europe-wide problem that affects all states. New mechanisms are being created, through which it is possible to respond much more quickly to challenges like those faced by Europe in 2015.
But criticism was rife too, including from German S&D member Birgit Zippel, the rapporteur on the screening of third country nationals at the EU's external borders. Zippel's comments are shared by AMS.
Wir stimmen daher heute nicht über ein perfektes Gesetzespaket ab. Es ist noch nicht einmal.
We are not voting on a perfect legislative package today. It is not even a very good one, and I will not hide my criticisms. Mandatory border procedures with no exceptions for families, inadmissibility decisions for supposedly safe third countries, and instrumentalization are all highly problematic elements, the necessity for which the Council has not been able to explain. This must be monitored particularly critically during implementation. And yet there are also positive elements in the package. In screening, for example, there are important protective measures and uniform standards, and a significantly strengthened independent monitoring mechanism for fundamental rights, which will also be extended to border procedures. In addition, solidarity cooperation between member states will be mandatory for the first time. This is an important first step towards shared responsibility, and a resettlement framework will also be introduced.
Renew Europe member Dragoș Pislaru touches on protests by NGOs working in this field.
It is obvious that these organizations wanted more. We ourselves at Renew wanted more. This is a compromise formula that is only partly satisfactory. In order to be able to reach a formula that passes, obviously derogations were made from the better protection of the rights of those who are in the asylum procedure or who find themselves in the situation of being refugees. We believe that always, in the end, a compromise is necessary to achieve a majority. Problems still remain, so basically the adopted package does not solve all the problems, but it is a big step forward towards a unitary response at European level.
The acid test will come in 2 years' time, of course, when the regulations enter into force. The proof of the pudding is always in the eating. Thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to come back next week.